So, I'd like to start by saying that I will be open for questions at the end of this service, or at the end of this sermon, in fact. So if there are any points that you want a little more clarification on, then please ask then. I say this because we're going to be plumbing some depths today and doing some biblical spelunking for the Lord. That's cave diving. I added a couple of paragraphs into this last night, and this is one of those. I'd like to make a brief mention of the date. Today is the second most important date on the satanic calendar, Samhain or Halloween. It's a festival celebrating fear, especially fear of the supernatural. I'd like to point out that we have the anodyne, the cure to that, as found in 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Today, we're going to investigate what perfect love looks like. Unusually, PowerPoint will come up any second, but not that one. It was good. I enjoyed that. Thank you, Rosie. Unusually, this sermon is going to open with a quote by the formidable new atheist writer and performer, the late, great Christopher Hitchens. That was the wrong one. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. In many of his debates, and indeed in his book, God is Not Great, Why Religion Poisons Everything, Mr. Hitchens used to pose the question, can you name one moral action that a Christian can do that an atheist can't? Can anyone think of anything? Boom! Is that what you were going to say? Oh, in that case, tell me what you were going to say, and I'll tell you whether it was the same. If you do, we get a blankety blank answer. We can pray. We can pray. Okay, but I'm going with yours. But shh, don't tell anyone. Becky said, "Love God." Today we're going to answer his question. Let's first provide some context. Yep, that's Christopher Hitchens. And the next one is the context. Nearly. We're in London. There's a place called Speaker's Corner. Has anyone ever been there? Yeah? Has anyone been there and given a speech? No, I've only been there, not on a Sunday. On Sundays, it is the bastion of free speech. You can go there and say anything at all, anything you like. And it has, in recent years, become the intellectual battleground between Islam and Christianity. Now, that's a picture of it there. That's a chap called Bob the Builder, not his real name. First century Jerusalem at Passover was a dangerous place to speak your mind. With Romans and Jews in an ideological tinderbox of mistrust and a very shaky truce, which could break out into violent rebellion at any stage, as it had done a few years earlier in the Maccabean revolt. Jesus is in full Speaker's Corner debate mode. He's been challenged by disingenuous Pharisees and Sadducees. They didn't believe in the resurrection, so they were sad, you see. I think it's one of those jokes that has to be made every time. And now comes along a scribe. Now, by comparison, the scribe seems to be sincere and genuinely inquiring. Suddenly, Jesus answers him seriously and speaks much kinder words to him than he did to the trolls trying to trick and trap him. Has anyone come across trolls on the internet? They lurk under internet bridges to jump out and ask questions to which they don't really want an answer. They're a lot of fun. The scribe is a student of what we call the Old Testament. He knew it backwards. largely because Hebrew is read from right to left. Thank you for the groans. I will take the groans and interpret them as laughter. So when he asks, of all the commandments, which is the most important? He's looking for a solid scriptural answer from Jesus. And Jesus doesn't disappoint. He starts by quoting the Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4-5, which I quote here from the Complete Jewish Bible. With the line, boom, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. And you are to love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, all your being, and all your resources, as translated in this Jewish Bible. And it's important to note that the word translated Adonai, or Lord, in most English Bibles, all capitals Lord, is Yod-He-Vav-He, which is Yahweh, which is the name of God. Yod-He-Vav-He, you see it written there, also known as the Tetragrammaton, and some of you are looking really impressed that I know long words, and some of you are thinking, where's my rotten tomatoes to throw at him? Jewish tradition holds this word too holy to be spoken, and thus they replace it with Adonai, which is basically Lord. This prayer is said daily by the Jews and is roughly equivalent to our Lord's Prayer or the American Pledge of Allegiance or a national anthem. It's that important. Now, you will be pleased to hear that we are not going to do an in-depth word study of each word, though that would be an excellent Bible study to do at some point. However, I will dig a little deeper into the last word, echad. See how well this works? I'm liking the power. Thanks, guys. Since it's directly relevant to us as Trinitarian Christians. This verse is a direct polemical refutation of the polytheistic religion which God had called the Israelites out of in Egypt. There are not many gods, there is one God. But there are two words in Hebrew for one that Moses could have chosen between. Yachid and Echad. And now I turn to the words of scholars far more qualified to comment than myself. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Hasidic teaching, you've got to do the, you can't speak Hebrew properly unless you have a serious throat infection. Hasidic teaching explains that Echad represents a deeper unity than Yachid. Yachid is a oneness that cannot tolerate plurality. If another being or element is introduced into the equation, the Yachid is no longer Yachid. Echad, on the other hand, this is where you start getting excited, represents the fusion of diverse elements into a harmonious whole. The oneness of Echad is not undermined by plurality. Indeed, it employs plurality as the ingredients of unity. Seeing diversity in unity in this fundamental Jewish prayer draws a Christian mind straight into, what's my next word? The Trinity! The Christian belief that God is three persons sharing one divine essence. Three whos in one what, so to speak. Jesus uses this to introduce the first and most important commandment. Love the Lord your God with everything you are and everything you have. Again, taken from the Jewish translation. Now, this sums up the first four of the 10 commandments. No gods before me, no idols, no blasphemy, keep the Sabbath. If we love God with all our heart, we won't entertain having anything before him. If we love him with all our being, we will recognize that since we ourselves are made in his image, we need no idols to worship him. The very thought of taking his name in vain would be as revolting as using our mothers as a swear word. If we love him with all our mind, we will recognize the wisdom of keeping his Sabbath holy. Loving God is the most sensible, practical, and wise decision we can make. But what does it mean? Do we have to conjure? I did that too quickly. Left a page of notes out. Okay, no one noticed that. We can edit that out later, right? Do we have to conjure feelings within ourselves? Do we have to find pictures of Jesus arousing and titillating? No! That is not love. That's the cheap imitation of love that the world has us enslaved to. Real love is so much deeper and richer than that. It is, and I'm sure some of you wrote this in the thing that we didn't get working, sorry about that. Real love is deciding, choosing to put someone's good before your own. Under this definition, love is an action of the will, not a fluffy romantic feeling. Applying this to God makes him your B-A-E, your bae. Boom. Now, I used to think this was short for babe, and kids used it, and it's disgusting. But here's what it means. It means, boom, before anyone else. If God is your before anyone else, then you've got it right. This is a standard which I suggest we have all failed to attain. And I can be sure of that because Paul told us so in Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Sin is, at root, a failure to love. When we sin, we put love of ourself and our own desires and wishes above those of God. Thus, he is no longer our before anyone else, our B-A-E, our bae. And this is a shame which falls on all of us in the human race. But understanding that is the only way that we can come to salvation through the work of Jesus. With that picture of love being the highest moral imperative, let's look at the second most important commandment. This one flows from the first, but let's be very clear about which one of these comes first in importance. Remember that Jesus was speaking to a scribe, so he quoted Moses again, this time from Leviticus. As this verse would be the end of conflict, if it were put into practice, you'll be able to remember that it is 1918. You see what I did there? Yeah, I put that in this morning. It is, of course, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I could prattle on about this for a while, or I could defer once again to a much greater mind than my own. There are so many of them. It will come as no surprise that I'm going to turn to my hero, C.S. Lewis, in Book 3, Chapter 7 of Mere Christianity. And I quote, for this I must put on glasses to make sure I quote correctly. We might try to understand exactly what loving your neighbor as yourself means. I have to love him as I love myself. Well, how exactly do I love myself? Now that I come to think of it, I have not exactly got a feeling of fondness or affection for myself. I do not even always enjoy my own society. So apparently, love your neighbor does not mean feel fond of him or find him attractive. I ought to have seen that before because, of course, you cannot feel fond of a person by trying. Do I think well of myself? Well, think myself a nice chap. Well, I'm afraid I sometimes do, and those are no doubt my worst moments. But that is not why I love myself. In fact, it is the other way round. My self-love makes me think myself nice. But thinking myself nice is not why I love myself. So, loving my enemies does not apparently mean thinking them nice either. That is an enormous relief. For a good many people imagine that forgiving your enemies means making out that they are really not such bad fellows after all, when it is quite plain that they are. Go a step further. In my most clear-sighted moments, not only do I not think myself a nice man, but I know that I am a very nasty one. Ask my wife for details. I can look at some of the things I've done with horror and loathing. So, apparently I'm allowed to loathe and hate some of the things my enemies do. Now that I come to think of it, I remember Christian teachers telling me long ago that I must hate a bad man's actions, but not hate the bad man, or as they would say, hate the sin, but not the sinner. For a long time, I used to think this a silly, straw-splitting distinction. How could you hate what a man did and not hate the man? But years later, it occurred to me that there was one man to whom I had been doing this all my life, namely, myself. However much I might dislike my own cowardice or conceit or greed, I went on loving myself. There had never been the slightest difficulty about it. In fact, the very reason why I hated the things was that I loved the man. Just because I loved myself, I was sorry to find that I was the sort of man who did those things. Consequently, Christianity does not want us to reduce by one atom the hatred we feel for cruelty and treachery. We ought to hate them. Not one word of what we have said about them needs to be unsaid. But it does want us to hate them in the same way in which we hate things in ourselves. Being sorry that the man should have done such things, and hoping, if it is in any way possible, that somehow, sometime, somewhere, he can be cured and made human again. End quote. Now, this is all good in theory, but I only have to put a picture or two up here. This could take a while because lots of pictures. For us to realize that this is a very hard teaching indeed. You may have to press the button again. It might not work. No, it's not going to work. Don't worry. I had a picture of Jimmy Savile up there and Myra Hindley and her mate. There we go. People we don't like. People we don't like. Donald Trump possibly doesn't deserve to be up there just because he's got really bad hair. And not a very nice man, I believe. It's a very hard teaching. And it is only by God's grace that we can forgive these people who have committed acts of obscenity and evil. But then, if I can forgive myself for my own sins, can I extend the same grace to these, my neighbors? The answer is, I don't know. But I do know that I am called so to do. And failure to do so is a failure to love God, which, as previously mentioned, is sin. We are called to love even the least lovely as we love ourselves and should love God. Imagine, in conclusion, what the world would look like if everyone practiced these two commandments of loving first God and then, flowing from that, sought the good for everyone made in his image. We would see no wars, just as Sarah prayed, no famine, no prosperity preachers on God TV. Instead, we would see a society committed to, albeit imperfectly, seeking to, God bless Micah, act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. Now, I said I would answer Hitchin's question, a moral duty which a Christian can do and an atheist cannot is, as Becky told us right at the beginning, to love God. And this is the greatest commandment, from which flows, in second place, loving neighbors as we love ourselves. Now, are there any questions? I have a roving mic against that possibility. Raise your hand if you have a question. If you don't have a question, just look straight forward. Okay, in that case, I'm assuming that I've communicated effectively and there are no questions. Fantastic.